has nothing to do with it.
No.
We are very pleased for you to be with us tonight. We try to sometimes talk a little bit about some of the odd stories that come up in this field. One that is sort of tangentially related that John and I have talked about in the last few days is, and I'm not sure if you've seen it, is the woman who was found mummified in Michigan.
Actually, no, I haven't seen that one. Oh, please share with us.
Yeah, apparently it may turn into quite a story, but she had not been seen since 2008, and her neighbors thought that she had moved, and her mortgage had been paid every month out of an account automatically.
Ooh.
They haven't released whether or not it was her account or not, and finally, after $50-some thousand were depleted in the account, it went into foreclosure. The bank sent someone in to get the house ready for a foreclosure sale, and they found her in her Jeep in the back seat, dead, and they estimate that she's been dead since 2008, and she was mummified. And it does not appear to be a suicide because the ignition was in the off position and the car was full of gas. But certainly odd with the mummification, especially in Michigan, under those kind of conditions.
Depending on who you talk to in Michigan, of course.
Well,
of course.
Of course. That's good, man.
So I guess those mysteries can still happen, you know. Those
I love that. Yeah.
So go ahead.
It's reminiscent of they had a story about I think it was this young girl that they found, and I think she's on display at a museum somewhere. It might even be here in the United States, although she didn't come from there. And she's still in very, very good condition, you know, barring all the options to deteriorate. And they said it would might have been a combination, and it could apply to this case also, of certain things in the atmosphere that would keep her body from deteriorating, or even some of the things in diet. And that's kind of odd, especially considering back in ancient Egypt, you know, that they thought that a lot of the things that you ate might affect your trip in the afterworld.
Well, I just found it odd that it would be that far north and that wet of a climate.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah, I never thought about it that way. But
yeah,
right.
Because you usually hear about mummies being found in dry climates.
Yeah. Well, maybe she drank a lot of alcohol and it, in essence, pickled her. You know, I mean, you just never know.
Could be high sodium intake. I'm not sure.
Wow.
maybe a case for or against high sodium intake. I'm not sure. Alcohol.
Pickles.
Another one that we saw this week was an example of belief in a curse. This was actually in England. A 200-some-odd-year-old bar had some dolls hanging. One was a witch, and a couple of others.
I hate dolls.
Yeah, that's a whole other story.
Yeah. With that hat, you'd never know that you.
I know, right?
That's true.
It's called switch and bait, or bait and switch.
Right.
And they hung from the ceiling for well over 100 years, and superstition had grown up that anyone who touched them, something bad befell them. They'd had people who accidentally touched them, cleaning them, have fall and break bones, things like that. And they had someone a few days ago actually steal the witch doll, and the next day, I believe it was, the building burned.
Wow.
And the owners are attributing it to the curse.
Well, you'd think if they stole the doll, then the building should be safe now. So it's kind of ironic.
Well, I think their position was that the curse was that the dolls were supposed to stay there.
Oh, gotcha.
Were disturbed in any way,
Right.
something that happened.
Yeah.
So,
Never mind.
but I guess it just goes to show the belief, the belief in curses still to this day.
Yeah, and I think, really from the beginning of time, I have a couple of friends that are in the parapsychology field, so they actively study stuff like that. And there's, quite a thought about people's belief systems, and for me especially, very strong believer in belief systems. From, just some of my personal works, even back when I was a psych major in college years and years and years ago, there was this whole study that we did independently about something called, it's basically a belief system. I think the example that I used was, let's say that I'm walking down the street and I'm in a wonderful mood. I had this marvelous date the night before, assuming that I'm in college and not married. And because I don't want my wife to, Anyway, and I am in such fond memory of this date that I don't realize as I brush against a pricker bush and gather a wound on my hand. And it starts to bleed, but I'm not noticing that, because of this mindset that I'm in. And suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I notice that I'm bleeding. And the first thing I do is look at the wound and say, ow, because I've been taught that if I have torn skin and blood, then it has to hurt. And even though it didn't hurt before I noticed it, I'd rather be right, and completely attributed to my own belief systems than pain-free. And someone who lives with pain now for 17 years really sees the strength in our belief system, a thing called a self-fulfilling prophecy. And there is no such thing as a curse without belief in curses. And once, and I think that's largely why I try to set a positive tone with the field of paranormal investigation, especially with the television shows that instill such fear behind it. It's really all about the fear, and if you don't see something, then it has to be out to get you and just there to jam you up. And we think, no. I mean, if you do your research and you find the history of the place, you could even attribute some activity to specific people. And if you approach them with respect, then you're bound to get respect in return, even if they're so-called nasty or even malevolent in some cases. But with that said, the parapsychologist friend of mine, he's had some studies with some students. He teaches a lot of classes and really confers that if you don't believe in curses, then you're not going to look for the evidence that just because you touch this doll or this doll is no longer on the property, something bad's going to happen, because our belief system forces us, whether we're conscious of it or not, to look at the bad stuff and ignore any non-bad thing that may have occurred because we'd rather be right. We'd rather have our beliefs affirmed, than have to be wrong about anything. Kind of an interesting thing. And I've got a story this week that I wanted to share with you guys, and I'm dying to get your opinion on this. There was a Harvard study just this week where they basically found evidence that backs up the Big Bang and Einstein's theory of relativity. They found these primordial gravitational waves in an area thought to represent like the split second after this Big Bang. And for those listening that may not know what this Big Bang is all about, they're saying that at the very beginning of the universe, there was basically nothingness. And there's this one spot of pure energy, smaller than an atom, that in a billionth of 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 a second exploded to become what is now everything. And a split second after this small point exploded, then the massive explosion that came along with it and all the introduction of all the different chemical structures that we now come to know, and eventually stars and planets and life itself, They found the point in space that represents like a split second after this, and they found evidence of gravity. We haven't been able to see it before, but they have found evidence that it exists. Long story short, and the reason I'm asking you guys about this, especially in regard to our paranormal realm, is it also really basically proves Einstein's theory of relativity, and part of that is space-time, which is space and time basically the same thing. They intertwine with each other. A warp in space is a warp in time, basically, according to Einstein's theory, and this means, long story kind of short, it's possible now that some of the residual energies that we see as paranormal investigators on certain properties could actually be evidence of living history rather than dealing with discarnates. And I'm not saying all kinds of different, the different energies that we come across. But there are certain ones that, upon reflection, may make sense, that some of the communication we have with some of these things could be a warp in time where we're talking to living history rather than people who have passed and are stuck at a certain location. And I'd love to know what you two think about that possibility.
Well, actually, as you were talking, I was thinking about I think it was ghost hunters at the Stanley Hotel, but if I have my facts wrong, I apologize. Basically, what they were having a conversation with an entity. She could hear them, they could not hear her, and she was actually responding. They had in this full-on conversation. They never heard her respond at the time, but after they went through and listened to the EVPs, she was actually literally responding to their questions, which kind of goes into a possibility that they were crossing a threshold, and with their voice, being energy. I mean, it's possible that they're crossing a threshold and talking to an actual living entity. Mm-hmm. But I agree with you. I think that's entirely possible. I mean, it's not an odd thought to think that we're living in a paranormal or a parallel universe. So why isn't it? I mean, why isn't that possible?
Right. And another thing is just a time loop. And I can't explain it exactly in terms of Einstein's theory, but I know he contemplated that there could be time loops in certain places, bending time-space. And in fact, there's one location that we investigate a lot. We've been there thousands of hours. That it's been occupied, and in fact was occupied for almost 150 years by the same family. And over time, what we find, we've documented at least 12 different presences there at different times. And what seems to happen is we will get activity that seems to be tied to a point in time, and then over time, it tends to go forward in time. Mm-hmm. And then it loops back around, and eventually we are getting the earliest part of the history of that location again, almost as if it is in a loop. So I think it's entirely possible that it is a function of space-time, or at least in some instances. I think that multiple dimensions are a possibility as well.
Right.
I think all of those are possibilities under Einstein's theories, and the fact that they now can actually prove gravity waves, I think is just one step towards answering some of those questions. I mean, Einstein and Tesla both were very interested in the paranormal, actually.
Yeah.
If you read their works. And they both of them said that they felt that if science ever gave serious consideration to it, that we certainly would prove, one, that it exists, and two, exactly what was happening.
Well, and who's to say that when we don't leave this body that we don't move to another dimension? I mean, why? I mean, what if that is the actual theory of heaven? I mean, in some religious sects, that's pretty common of being, you go into a place called heaven. Well, maybe heaven is another universe entirely. You're just moving energy. You're not actually.
Or two dimension. two dimensions existing simultaneously in the same location, not even just that you're bridging them. There are different theories of bubble universes that basically that multiple universes can exist in the same physical location.
And that's exactly why I rode this body into the ground. Because I would never use it again. Yeah, baby, I'm going out with a bang.
Well, it makes sense, you know. That's what I hope to do too. You know, go out with a bang and not a whimper. And you know, some of the science, especially what they call quantum physics, is starting to look at paranormal and metaphysics, and embracing it just a bit. And the only problem with that is a lot of these new theorists that have embraced our realms aren't really taken all that seriously in the scientific community yet, but that's coming, and this new discovery will change things. And it also does feed a multiverse theory as well, just as much as it feeds all the Einstein theories, including relativity and space-time. But for the listeners who might be slightly confused, it's when we think of time, you know, we as people with consciousness tend to look at one straight line. You know, the past is behind us, the future we just haven't been there yet and don't know yet. So all we really understand is present moments. And all these present moments, though, so there are some of these quantum theorists that talk about atoms and well, I don't want to get all into that, but they're with the Einstein theory of space-time and warping, the ability of bendable time or space, means that this straight line that we've come to know and understand as our understanding of time is not necessarily so. And it does open the possibilities for all these different things, and it kind of encourages us, especially in the paranormal and metaphysical realms, to really think about what time really means. And it's also the beginning of this universe could be just the beginning of a universe in a series of multiple universes, or universes kind of intersecting as bubbles, as you mentioned. And all of this really comes more into light with something that just happened like 5 days ago, and that's pretty cool. So I think that this get-together with the two of you and I on this night, is just meant to be because of it. And the mummy in Michigan.
That's right.
Well, and I agree. You know, I was thinking what you were just talking about. There's been a major shift in thought process in both spiritual and metaphysics in the last few years. It's been, I mean, really since I was a kid. I remember. I mean, I was born Baptist, but before I was 5 years old, my mom had left the church and we had moved on to other spiritual, you know, educational things. You know, I mean, metaphysics to say, but. So I've lived it almost my entire life, and there has been a huge shift in the last probably 5 to 10 years, and it's really coming to a head, I think, really soon. And there's going to be a meld between science and spirituality. And
it's coming.
We're going to see a massive change.
Yeah, I absolutely seeing a few little things that. Where one is accepting the other, but it's going to take time, as with anything with human beings. But I do think it's coming.
Yeah, I do too. And who knows? When they talk in the Bible about revelations, I think what history suggests is that they may have been pointing a finger at Julius Caesar as being the Antichrist, and they're thinking about things that were within their own grasp of time 2,000 years ago. And even with that said, the end of the world as we know it could represent the end of the religious world as we know it. In this new day and age where it seems everything is being exposed, you see how the government is already working a lot differently with the pressures that they're under, because we're no longer fooled by anything. You can't keep things from us with this internet out there. We can find out more information than news outlets can. So instead of being, let's say, civil with the news. You know, they really have to touch on a lot of kind of TMI type of things because they know that we'll find out about it. And we may see a similar change in religion coming up because of that. And I don't want to pick on religion because I firmly believe that we are a species of mammals. We're animals, and there has to be something that keeps us civil, you know, and I think religion sets a very good standard for that, or at least on paper is supposed to, you know, to think that there's this big invisible man in the sky who watches everything that we do, everything we think, and every part of our and fiber of our being, and really determines the afterlife. Part of that makes me think that we will never really discover ghosts in our lifetime, because if we can discover ghosts or prove in metaphysics and psychics that the afterlife is simply kind of where a series of lifetimes where we learn the mistakes that we've made in this one and live on to either make less mistakes next time, or have finally come to a point where we're so close to the universal force that may be considered God that's where our lives end or our lifetimes end. And if there's really no consequence for our actions, then what's going to keep us behaving? So if somebody comes up and discovers, you know, specifically and you know, something that you can't defer from, that the afterlife exists, and it's really doesn't measure all the things we do in this world to dictate where we go afterwards, nothing will encourage us to behave. So I don't think that discovery will ever be made, at least not in our lifetime here. And I'd like to know what you guys think about that.
Well, I think that I think it's going to be an evolutionary process, not to try to create a pun there, but just as our modern religions supplanted more ancient pagan beliefs and actually incorporated many of them, and now many of the believers of our modern religions, one, don't believe that, and two, are just abhorrent of that idea. I think that it'll be an evolutionary process, that the same will happen, that people will somehow take the kernels from religion that help them deal with life and incorporate it into their new understanding.
Right. Yep. And something to back up that point.
Yeah.
And something to back up the point you just made, Lisa, is that there are some news outlets that are actually getting blamed for exposing this Harvard study about the Big Bang and Einstein's theory of relativity because it cuts into the creational belief. So they're saying they're saying that that's blasphemous, and some of the news outlets that carried the story are actually being chided for it, lectured, banned, and so it's going to take a while.
Well, it's the same as 500 years ago, Copernicus and Galileo being persecuted.
Right.
It's really no different. It's the process of humans dealing with change and abstract thought changing. Right. And it always seems to be a torturous process.
Yeah.
Yes, it does, because of those belief systems.
Right.
I think this new pope, and anybody that knows me knows that I'm not a Christian, but I do follow a lot of the spiritualities in the world. But this new pope is just phenomenal. I think he's really making a huge effort to make a change to lead with love and understanding and compassion instead of leading with an iron fist. And I think that's the biggest key to spiritual enlightenment as far as this big change that we all know is coming. Because we have to lead in love. Leading with anger is absolutely useless. I've led a life of anger and fighting and carrying on, and it's just got me nowhere. Love and compassion will get us a lot farther down the road. That was really very deep, wasn't it? We're just going to it was like...
It was, but I love that. I absolutely love that.
Yes.
Oh, we're not going to go over the hill. I'm not 40 yet.
Well, I'm close, so I'm over the hill, and I'll say...
And I'm in between.
Thank you.
So.
But I think you're absolutely right, and some of the things that the new Pope says and does makes me cringe a little bit, because he's really going against the flow of a lot of conventional belief, and it takes a lot of nerve to do that. But he is, like you said, yeah, he does, and
he'll make a lot of enemies that way too.
I'm sure he will, but at the same time, I love that you interpret it as him leading with love. To me, personally, that means a lot. I think a lot of people in the paranormal and metaphysical realms come from a place of pretty distinct pain. I've seen that in almost all the people that I've met in this field, and they're all really, in their own way, the most fascinating, wonderful, and beautiful people I've ever had the honor to get to know. But a lot of them, if not all of them, come from a place of pain, and it's kind of a unifying element for us. And that's why, people talk about the paranormal unity and how it's just perhaps this pipe dream or facade or whatever, but I would still love to see more of that, because I think that whatever divides us in this realm has a lot to do with ego and pride, and not humility. And to see a man like that take chances like this in his own neighborhood, metaphorically speaking, is, God bless him.
Well, so much through history has been done in the name of religion in particular, but other theories as well, as out of fear and fear of loss of power and control.
Look at the beginning of our own nation. It was started by ruling with the fist in Christianity. That was just the most horrible, horrific thing I could ever think of in my life. That's not what Jesus taught, and we've kind of gotten off on a religious talk here. But my belief is that Jesus' religion was love, and he wouldn't have taught that. Why would people lead that way? That's just ridiculous,
Well, yeah, and if you go a little further with that, with the founding fathers, a lot of them that actually shaped the fundamental documents of our country and everything, they weren't Christian. They were theists, but they weren't Christian, but they had to hide that too, because it had such a stigma that if you weren't Christian, that you weren't going to really survive in society. So they had to work in the dark, so to speak, to try to present a more enlightened view of things, and it's a hidden history, really. But yeah, most people really believe that you had a very strong fundamentalist environment here with some of the original religious groups who came over here. But when you came to the actual founding of the United States, the founding fathers, the majority of them were not of that background. They were theists. They believed in God with a small g, and not of the church. But that was something that would have put them in peril of life and limb and everything they owned. And so often in history, progress is made through the back doors, so to speak. And so it is very nice to see the Pope actually coming out and being very open with these ideas of change, despite backlash that is inevitable.
I don't think he's done that. I think he supports gay rights, but I don't think.
Well, no, I have to agree with you.
Right? Did you take the tinfoil off?
No.
About it?
The tinfoil's underneath my stocking cap.
Okay.
More protection.
I do have to agree with you, John. But I think he sees what a lot of us are seeing too, that it's hard to get people into church now. When I was young and years before you were even thought of, John.
Yeah, because I'm only 21.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay. I'll buy that for $1. Okay. But, I don't. It was like, if you didn't go to church in the days when I was a kid, you were like ostracized from your community, and it doesn't matter what church it was as long as it was a church. I spent summer school in our church when I was younger. One year we went to every single different church, every single kind of belief, so we could see firsthand, what kind of ceremonies they had. What kind of belief structure and systems that they went by, and which version of a book, such as a Bible or a Quran or a early Testament or whatever, that their beliefs were founded upon, so we could see all the different beliefs out there. And it was an eye-opening experience, because the irony was that each and every one of these faiths believed that their prayers and their specific beliefs were right and everybody else is wrong. And even though it's all based on, I'd like to say, the golden rule, or love thy neighbor, or let's get together as a species, and as where everybody's a part of this wonderful unit, and we're all as one under God or whatever their, prophet or leader was. But so many wars and so many conflicts and so many, it was just so ironic, because as soon as you walk out of that church, or if you listen to the people on the way out, how they blasted what so-and-so was wearing, or did you see that whore who showed up this morning and, she's got a lot of nerve to, and just all the divisive stuff that was outside the church parking lot, as soon as this Mass or whatever was over, that was even more eye-opening. So again, I have to go back, John, to you're reveling in what this new Pope says, because he's talking about love, and I think we don't hear enough of that.
I agree with you.
We used to have TV shows that had a moral of the story, even comedies, and they would set guidelines for decent behavior. And now, it's not like the hit or miss morality of political correctness, which is our guide today, or reality television, which is anything but real and almost teaches just the opposite, rude behavior. It makes you more interesting if you're brash and rude and arrogant, and that's what sets you apart from the rest, and it teaches people to be rude and arrogant,
Exactly.
And so
it's teaching our children to be rude and arrogant, and that's a whole nother, you can get me on a rant for that forever, but
oh, me too, because they're better at it than we are,
Yeah. Well, they've had good role models in a lot of aspects. As far as like you're talking about television and even teachers these days, they're not allowed to discipline children in school. Well, right. I remember getting my butt swatted a few times, and I'm all right.
It worked, and I'm sorry, we're not saying it's okay to be abusive, but at the same time, if there's some sort of fear that is your biggest lesson, other than happy holidays, the terror alert is now set to orange, a more path-specific fear and guidelines set, so we will at least be forced to behave as young, so we can teach it to our young. But now the kids are being better at badness than we are, because the Rugrats make the parents look like idiots and the kids are smart, So the kids,
That's true.
So the kids are learning that they're smarter than their parents, and they don't take what their parents say seriously. And right. So it starts from a very young age. And I'd probably be first in line to okay that stuff, back in the day. But the line is now that I've gotten older, the line is a little bit further away from where I wanted it to stop, and it's just.
I agree with you, and Chip, you and I grew up in the time that you may well have been the same as I, that you grew up with. You had 3 TV stations, pretty much. You had 3
yes.
networks, and and there was a very strict code of what was on TV, and you were greeted in the evening by Walter Cronkite, who
Miss Walter Cronkite,
who gave you a sense of reality, responsibility,
But he was still nurturing, though. He had this nurturement in his voice. So even when the world falling apart, a president being assassinated, or crying when we first landed on the moon, if in fact that's true, depending on who you listen to, there was this nurturing quality to his voice that even though he was basically bringing bad news, they still would not expose the real horrors and a lot of the inside crap that was going on back then, which we've all come to know about today. And you felt safe no matter what was going on because Walter Cronkite was this kind of nurturing authority figure, you know?
Well, that we could see that there were still rational people.
Yes.
I mean, there was still rationality. And today, you know, I may get flamed, but, you know, you get Fox News and CNN and the rest of them. And, you know, there's no rationality, there's no perspective, and there's no thought of what does this really mean for society other than the next 5 minutes.
Right, and there's no line of decency, you know. I mean, you think if they talk about J. Edgar Hoover, for example, with the FBI, you know, and if everybody in Washington knew that he was a cross-dresser, if that is in fact true, we didn't really need to know about that at 6:30 p.m. at the dinner table because the whole family was watching. And the fact that they kept stuff like that from us was kind of a plate of decency, more so than not telling us the full and utter truth, because they had to think of the family unit first. The family unit has changed an awful lot since then, and everything else has kind of fallen apart by the wayside. But there's no line anymore because I think the kids don't trust decency. There has to be some more to the story, and they can find it. A 2-year-old can find more stuff on the internet than I can as a radio professional. It's a little disconcerting.
You're right.
That's true. I mean, and, you know, and just that sense of stability of, you know, you were sent to bed before Johnny Carson came on, and you knew there was a reason, but you didn't know what it was.
Yep. But we all stayed up anyway.
You take this back to the paranormal side of things.
Exactly.
You know, we're talking about decency and stuff like that, and you've got all these people on television now that are provoking and poking and treating entities like crap.
Right. Don't get me started.
I mean that falls into that kind of that whole thing of just respect.
Yeah.
I mean,
or reality television rather than education.
Exactly, and it's all about a stimulus. I mean, they're wanting to stimulate the shock value of the people. Mm-hmm. But really, what we do as at least in our group, and I'm getting that from you also, is that our research is almost as spiritual to us as it is to anyone, and we kind of treat it that way.
Okay.
So, you know, I mean, I wouldn't go into somebody's home and cuss and carry on and pick fights with them, unless I was kidding, but, you know, they would know I was kidding. But, you know, so we do the same thing when we go into a location, and you know, we don't want to stir up anything, we don't want to cause any problems, but I think that's part of the problem with paranormal research this day is that we're seeing so much of this out there that it's really almost becoming the norm, and it shouldn't be.
No, it should be. I agree with you wholeheartedly. And there are some, you know, of us, some of the radio hosts on Facebook that ask their Facebook friends or listeners what they think about certain things going on. And one of them has been, you know, people that learn everything they know from television and come to your events, you know, would you even want them to come in the door because they're so misinformed. And there was this story. I had a friend who was on one of the shows, and I'm not going to say the name, but it basically allows regular people to tell their stories. Let me just say that. That might even make that light bulb pop on. This one group had a particular story that they wanted to share, and it was good enough to make this show. So they sent a cameraman and a producer, basically the same thing. I think one guy had both titles, and basically said to them, your story, I like your story, but there is no life or death element here. It's not scary enough. So why don't you add something that makes you feel like your lives were threatened or you were scared to death? Otherwise, it won't stand out amongst all the other shows, all the other segments we got already from other people. So if you want to make it on the show at all, you really have to add this element of fear in. So here are people with integrity that have a choice. They can see themselves on national television and have something that pretty much kind of puts them on the map or is a good bullet point on their resume. But if they don't lie, if they don't create something that wasn't really there in the first place, then to talk about this spiritual encounter in loving fashion or in respectful order becomes moot because their voice won't be heard unless they add an element to fear. And I have seen some of the professionals that have to do this on a weekly basis. Not all of them, but some of them are kind of obligated to do stuff like that. I've also seen some of the people in this industry that I've admired for all my years in this industry, since the 80s, who have been shunned by television. And they almost have to ask themselves, Jesus, is it even worth trying? And it shows a different side that a lot of people that learn from these shows may not understand or see, and that's why shows like yours and ours are I think good for the public.
Hey Chip, this is Eric. We lost Lisa and them, but we're going to get them back. I do have a question for you, sir.
Sure.
Do you think there's a possibility that we will ever see a televised show that actually shows the reality?
I think if we do, it would have to be on PBS.
I would have to agree, but PBS won't touch the paranormal.
Not yet, but it's coming. And I think there are scientists, some of the physicists now, that are kind of crossing the line between science and metaphysics. And some parapsychologists and some people who have been valued for a long, long time that are still beating on that door. And the day will come when PBS wants some extra ratings, and they'll make sure that it's education and not fear-mongering crap.
Yeah, that is a huge deal with us here at PEN too. I can't stand anything more than when they go to the lowest common denominator, which unfortunately always does seem to be the fear-mongering. It's terrible to see, and to be quite honest. There are people that I've known that have been involved in either demonology and not the I learned it from a pamphlet kind of demonologist. These are experienced people that have been in the field 30 plus years.
Mm-hmm.
It is so rare that for a TV show to find one every week, that's not even reality.
Yeah, I don't even know if it's even in the cards as far as television is concerned. But I think the shark is jumping a little bit, so it may come to a point that a network desperate for something new and different may actually get some sort of educational show on, and we can only hope.
Yeah, because there's some of the shows it's just you almost surprised because that had to make it through a committee.
Yeah, I know, right?
There's a group of people agreed that that's the best they could do, and some of the shows are just I don't know. It's not to get too specific, but when you say, that you're in a lockdown and you're all by yourself and you see all three people that are supposedly on a lockdown on camera,
mm-hmm. Right.
Are you trying to tell me that you don't think I'm smart enough to figure out there's a fourth person holding that camera?
Yeah, but I think that we are so used to this kind of reality that we buy it, people on a daily basis proudly believe that a pig and a lizard can sell you life insurance, but they question ghosts, and, that's kind of puzzling in itself. But it's been associated with horror films for so long that the TV is making it into kind of a half-an-hour horror movie series. And I talked to, actually, we had a Satanist on one of our shows recently.
Corvus Nocturnum?
Yes, Corvus, one of the nicest Satanists I've ever met in my life, And I read the Satanic Bible when I was 12 years old. I had a pretty good understanding of it, in addition to all the other faiths that we were looking at that summer, because there wasn't a satanic church to measure by, nor was there any Muslim church. So I independently went to a mosque, and I independently read the Satanic Bible, and there's really not that much malice behind that stuff. They're not encouraging the same bad behavior that reality TV encourages. They're just saying that, get more out of your own life for yourself. Make sure you live your life to the fullest, like it's your last day. And hey, if you have to have some extra sex or steal something every once in a while or lie to a few people, so be it. But it's almost the same thing as a split personality. In psychology, a split personality isn't considered psychotic because it helps people. Are you still there?
Yeah, we're still there.
Oh, okay.
We got it,
But just
okay, there we go. Yeah. Hey guys.
Well, Chip, this is a topic that's been on several of the other shows, and I wanted to ask you this real quick while I have just a moment.
Sure.
What do you think about the theory that some people that are schizophrenic are actually that way because they are on both sides of the veil?
I think in certain instances there is truth to that, but I think it's a rarer occurrence that many people really hot on metaphysics and psychology assess. I think it's more of a rare thing. Back in my day, we had a theory that there was a self-induced schizophrenia from people that were so lazy that they found it easier to pretend to see things and hear things, so people would wait on them hand and foot 24/7, and if they didn't really want to talk to that many people, they wouldn't have to. They'd be in this little room and people would feed them and clean after them and so on and so forth. So even that's true. But the point about the split personality is it's considered a hysterical, dissociative, neurotic reaction because the split personalities help the people cope with reality. And that's the whole point that makes it not a psychosis. Whereas some of the real schizophrenia now, I have a family member actually who's schizophrenic, and I worked with schizophrenics. I taught computer skills and job skills to a whole group of schizophrenics in one of the bigger regions of New York State. And just some of the most wonderful and beautiful people that are very misunderstood, much like psychics and paranormal people, because we've been outside looking in for a long time, and suddenly we're cool. And pretty soon, a show like Perception on TNT or something, will make schizophrenia cool. Because these poor people, the stigmas against them are just like the curse that we were talking about at the beginning of the show. Schizophrenics in real life are really less inclined to become violent. And if they do, it's usually against their own selves, or in a situation that's so ridiculous it's kind of easy to get law enforcement involved. So they're really not these horrible, violent people. It's psychopaths who are not psychotic, but just have no soul, that are really the threat and the danger that schizophrenics are getting blamed for. So, but there are some instances, yes, where I think it's almost like a possession of sorts. But I would still classify that more a possession and not a psychosis. But finding somebody to actually try and prove that for the individual or just in general is nearly impossible.
Well, I don't think we're quite to that point where it's well enough accepted for that to be seen as validation or proof yet. But I think eventually we will get there.
Yeah, and there's new studies now. One of the biggest ones recently assesses that what they may have found what really causes schizophrenia in people, and it's in the central nervous system, in the area that separates our inner dialogue from our outer dialogue. Just like some people they lose the ability to tell their left from their right and have to relearn it all over again. These people have lost their ability to separate their inner dialogue from their outer dialogue. So they may hear their inner voice step in outer dialogues or vice versa, and it just makes them socially a mess. And how do you deal with that when society is not ready to take you in and say, here, I'll help you with that, or even get half of the psychologists to prove it. The reason that I'm not a psychologist now is I was very disappointed with the mental health industry in general. And, I don't care if they send me hate mail because, I have just seen a lot of people that are sadistic in nature. join the field because they can find victims. They can find people who nobody will believe when they say, well, the guy who's head of this whole thing, tortured me or threatened me or abused me. Not to say that happens everywhere, but I've seen it happen, and I've seen doctors who are in it really just to label people so they can feel better about themselves, and nobody gets help that way. But we're off on a real tangent there.
Well, Chip, I have to tell you, my other life, I'm an attorney, and so I've actually dealt with a lot of those kind of situations and those interactions, and I've seen that tendency in the mental health field as well, and end up advocating for those patients. And to be perfectly honest, at times it seems that there are quite a few that go into the field because of their own demons, so to speak. Yeah. Or as you're saying, almost the sociopathic tendencies to play out their little fetishes almost. But it's so many fields are dysfunctional like that, and I'll be the first to say that the legal profession tends to be that way too.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Well, I was going to say too. You were talking about how, and we're about 3 minutes out, but you were talking about schizophrenics and being between inner dialogue and outer dialogue. Mm-hmm. In a way, isn't that what we as sensitives, as psychics, do? I mean, but we know how to control it.
Well, yeah, yes, and that's the funny thing, because look, I was better at being a spirit medium in that time than I am now. A lot of that is my physical pain, because you really have to go places in your mind, in emotional sensitivities that hurt, and I just can't do that with the pain now. And it's kind of emasculating to have to admit, but it is what it is, So those who can't teach, so I can at least do that. But it's weird, because I was working with schizophrenics, and I was going through, I could say similar things that they could say, about seeing things that aren't there, talking to people that aren't there, and absolutely believing with every fiber that I have that they exist. But I was talking with dead people, and they're talking to Bugs Bunny, and what's the difference, really? Right. So, it's kind of troubling. But my family member, though, they have changed her diagnosis because she was very functional for schizophrenic. They're calling it temporal lobe epilepsy, which I think is kind of a clever term. Part of that is because some of these new medicines, all these exciting new medicines that may solve your acne but will make you grow a third arm, those kind of medicines. In order to prescribe those kind of medicines, they changed the name so they could give her different medicine, but the medicine worked. So now they have to consider, and this is something that Van Gogh, back in the day when he was cutting his own ear off, thought he had. It was actually diagnosed with temporal lobe epilepsy. They didn't want to call it schizophrenia because, they wanted to sell some art. And, so there's a case where something in history back in the Middle Ages comes back, basically, in this day and age, and still works. And I like the thought of temporal lobe epilepsy, because that makes your question, John, absolutely pertinent to this discussion, because the only real difference is we know that even though we're talking to a spirit of somebody, or having an actual dialogue in our third eye, in our minds with a discarnate individual, that we know that it's a different reality. It's based on a separate reality, and it's really all about love and unity, and to some extent physics, where somebody who has psychosis, and because they really can't separate the reality from the fantasy, therein lies the difference. Even though some of it is the same thing, but I think with the third eye and metaphysical people who work very hard to see and speak with the dead or discarnate, whether they're paranormal or psychic, they work very hard to change their reality a little bit. So some of that will come in, and there is a lot of work involved in it, and a lot of that is a higher understanding of the universe, of love, of spirituality, not religion necessarily, but spirituality. And there is a difference there. But yeah, it is very similar.
I agree with you entirely, Chip, and I think that's a great place for us to end. I hope you'll come back and talk to us some more.
We could do like a full day show, and this conversation would never end. It's fascinating. It's been great.
Yeah, I'm game.
Okay, good. I'll get with you. We'll get you back hopefully before too long and continue this conversation because we just opened up more questions. Thank you very much. And for everybody, stay tuned to Close to Death with Selena Roan. And next week, come back and join us as we talk to Rob Garcia. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jeff.
Excellent. Thanks for having me. It's been my honor. People can hear me at 7 p.m. Thursday nights on the A1B Radio Network for Beyond the Norm. Very interesting show. I love you guys. I thank you for having me.